All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for taking the time to join us in this Upwork Skill Certification for Technical Skills webinar. I'm Liz Vickers. I'm a Senior Program Manager on Upwork's Talent Success team, and I lead the Upwork Skill Certifications team. I've been at Upwork for a little over 5 years, and before that I freelanced on Elance and then Odesk and then Upwork. Also presenting with me today will be Tigran Sloyan, the CEO of CodeSignal, and Bittu Ahlawat, Senior Director of Engineering here at Upwork. If you've been invited to this webinar, you're part of a small select group of talent on Upwork. You've either already been invited to apply for an Upwork skill certification, or you're on our prioritized waitlist to be invited to apply for an Upwork skill certification soon. Before we dive into the webinar content, I want to make you aware of a few helpful resources. First, if you'd like to ask a question on this call, we'll be taking questions on Slido at the end of the webinar. Jedder Suleiman is going to share a Slido link in the GoToWebinar chat now. You just go ahead and click on that link and you can submit your questions, and you can look at approved questions and upvote those your submitted questions there. If you have a question that you don't want to ask publicly, that you'd prefer to ask one-on-one, you can email assessments@upwork.com. This goes to my team. We're happy to help you. Finally, if you'd like to take the assessment, but you haven't gotten the invite yet, or you think you've gotten the invite and you can't find it, or not sure if you got the invite, we're also sharing a link out in the chat where you can sign up to receive that invite or receive a link to your existing invite, and we'll prioritize you to receive an invitation to that. Jed or Suleiman, if you could share out the email address and also the sign up form into the chat, thank you, so that people can copy it. So I'd like to cover today's agenda. In today's webinar, I'm going to start by explaining the Upwork Skill Certification credential, what it is, why it was created, why you might want one. Next, we'll talk about the process to earn a technical skill certification, which includes pre-qualification and achieving a passing score on 2 coding tests. CodeSignal powers the coding tests, and Tigran from CodeSignal will be sharing details about the first test, the general coding assessment, also referred to as GCA, and how to prepare for it. And next, Bittu will share information about the second test, the skill-specific test, and we'll talk a little bit about the experience on CodeSignal itself. The skill-specific tests are also powered by CodeSignal, but they're proprietary to Upwork. Afterwards, we have time set aside for questions at the end. We have an hour reserved if we need it, but depending upon the amount of questions, we may wrap up in about 45 minutes. So let's go ahead and dive into the certifications. First off, what is an Upwork Skill Certification? So an Upwork Skill Certification is a credential that displays on your Upwork profile. You can see a screenshot of how it displays today here. The credential is visible to all freelancers and all clients. We newly released this at the beginning of October this year, and so we're looking at ways to improve the display of the certificate so it's more prominently visible, and also so it's more clear how the certification was earned and what it represents. Currently, it's available in 10 technical skills, and we also have Upwork skill certifications available for 16 design and creative skills, including UI and UX design. And this is a list of the technical skills we currently have assessments for. This list is also available in the Upwork Help article. And for the web development skills, the test is on the actual language versus a framework. So talking about a little bit about who the Upwork skill certifications are for, we design these certifications to help expert level talent distinguish themselves and stand out on Upwork. For most people, expert level will take at least 3 years of experience to achieve a passing score on both tests. Currently, the pass rate for those that complete the test today is about 19%. Earning a certification is a way for you to showcase your expertise independent of your background and experience. So if you're really good at what you do, but you haven't attended a well-known school or worked with large clients, this is another way that you can showcase your capabilities. Also, I've heard repeatedly from clients that they look at these signals like credentials as positive signals that you're dedicated to your work. From a client perspective, Upwork skill certifications help in a few ways. For domain experts who are hiring, we hope that they understand the assessments and it can help them to significantly reduce their candidate screening time. For clients who don't have expertise, it can help to increase overall confidence in hiring technical resources. And for Upwork talent specialists who help clients invite talent to projects, the information helps us to improve invitation relevancy. Some other perks of an Upwork skill certification: you receive 80 connects for each past development assessment. You're also prioritized for invitations to submit proposals to jobs that are assisted by Upwork talent specialists. And you'll be prioritized for selection for the expert vetted program. However, please know that program is very small and it is based on client demand. So only a small percentage of those who earn an Upwork skill certification will ultimately be selected for an expert vetted interview. So let's talk about the actual process. As I mentioned, it's a 3-step process: pre-qualified to be invited, take the general coding test, and then a skill-specific test. So I'll talk just a little bit about the pre-qualification process. So as mentioned earlier, it's an invitation-only program, typically targeted to professionals with at least 3 years of deep skill experience. Also, as mentioned before, if you've been invited to this webinar, you are or will be soon invited to take the test, and you can sign up on that link shared in the chat if you'd like that invitation soon. Before taking either test, you need to have a recent identity verification completed on Upwork. When you apply, we'll check the status of your identity verification and we will guide you to the next steps if a new or updated verification is needed. You'll also need to have either a 100% complete profile, or if you've already earned a talent badge like top rated or rising talent, that also meets the profile qualification. At this time, we're prioritizing applicants who haven't yet earned an Upwork skill certification. So if you already have one and want to earn one in a different skill, that's not something we're actively offering today, but there's definitely likelihood we may do that in the future. Also, if you've previously attempted to earn the certification but didn't achieve a passing score, in most cases you're eligible to apply for a retake in 6 months. It is possible to lose eligibility, reapply if you don't follow and meet the guidelines when you take the coding test. And the guidelines for technical skills basically just mean that you follow the proctoring rules. The proctoring setup guidelines are shared as part of the experience on CodeSignal when you begin the test. Examples of things are like you need to be alone in the room when you take the test, and you need to share your webcam microphone and have your webcam shared throughout the session. So just please pay close attention to the guidelines as you start to take the test on CodeSignal, and stop and ask if you have any questions. Also, if you have a special circumstance that makes a particular guideline especially challenging, please reach out and let us know. And I will hand it off to Tigran for the GCA.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz, for that great overview in the beginning. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. CodeSignal, I guess at the high level, before I dive into GCA, we're really committed to the mission of helping the world go beyond resumes and creating a more even playing field in which if you're highly qualified and if you have the skills, you should be recognized for it. And we're excited to be partnering with Upwork to bring the Upwork certification to life. So I'll be covering the general coding assessment portion, and then Bittu will dive into the more details. I guess the best way to think about the general coding assessment is we approach at CodeSignal design of knowledge assessment in layers, right? You can imagine at the core level, you've got ability to write code in the language of your choice, ability to really translate human language into a computer language, regardless of which language that you choose to do it in, but nothing about, language specifics or framework specifics, right? So if you think about the layers, at the very core layer, it's coding in a language of your choice, data structures, algorithms, just at the core of what's into computer programming. One level higher, you've got language specific assessments, such as if your coding language of choice is JavaScript, do you understand asynchronous loops or promises and things like that? And the higher level than that, you get into React and framework-based assessments where you're trying to measure higher level knowledge. So GCA is really aimed to measure the core, and hence it sits at the very beginning of the certification process, really helping identify problem-solving ability, regardless of the coding language, and ability to, as I said, translate English into code. And we'll dive into each kind of the details of GCA and explain to you how we accomplish that. Liz, want to go to the next one? Awesome. So let's get into specifics of what goes into GCA. GCA is already extremely popular in the industry, and it's becoming more and more a standard way for companies to go beyond resumes, because without a top of the funnel standardized assessment, you're really stuck with looking at someone's resume and saying, do I recognize any of the keywords here? And if I don't, you pass. So GCA is aimed to augment that and ideally come first. So how do we do it? It's a 70-minute assessment. We've done a lot of research to understand what's a good length where it doesn't get too frustrating for candidates doing it, because obviously if we gave you a 3-hour test, we would get a better signal, but that would also get really taxing for you. We understand you have busy lives and you're trying to minimize the amount of time you contribute while getting the maximum output. On the other hand, assessments that tend to be less than an hour don't tend to produce a high quality enough signal. So 70 minutes is kind of that golden middle, even though most people who can finish GCA all the way tend to finish in 60. One thing to keep in mind is right now, there is a 1-minute grace period at the end. So it's really 71, but in that 1 minute, all you can do is just submit things that you wrote and you cannot edit it, right? So the assessment will time out at 70-minute mark, and it will give you 1 extra minute just to submit if you forgot to submit. GCA is based on a framework, so it's not a static assessment in the sense that there's no real way to say, oh, here are the 4 questions that went into GCA. Obviously, that would be very cheating prone, and as soon as somebody did it and shared the answers, it would be really easy to track down. However, it's not just a random collection of questions. It's based on a framework that really allows us to keep a very consistent bar, right? So as you go through, even if you and I did, or Bittu and I did GCA today, he would get a set of 4 questions, I'll get a set of 4 questions. Those 4 questions would be highly consistent with each other, right? Q1 will measure the same thing at the same level of difficulty, and we'll have the same expected average solve time. Same goes for Q2, same goes for Q3, same goes for Q4. And as you might have already guessed, there are 4 questions in GCA, and in some sense, they go too easy to difficult, even though it's arguable whether Q3 or Q4 is more difficult. They just measure different concepts, but we'll dive into that in the upcoming slides. Go next, Liz. All right, let's talk about Q1. So here's what goes into Q1, right? So Q1 is meant to be more like a warm-up, but also as a standardized assessment used very widely across the industry, we want to capture as wide of a spectrum as possible, right? So you can imagine GCA gets administered to students who might have taken like 2 classes just to kind of, so if we don't include anything on the easy side, most people will get a 0 on it. We don't want to have too many zeros. We want to have at least some lower points and measure the lower end of the spectrum. But for most of you qualified engineers, Q1 should be more like a warm-up, which is also a benefit, right? Because if you dive right into the harder questions, you don't have enough time to kind of get really comfortable in the platform. So Q1, it tends to be very basic. As you can see, it measures 2-3 basic skills, really a good example is like, given an array, can you iterate through it? Take any 3 consecutive elements and just merge them together, right? fairly simple, doesn't require any advanced knowledge, doesn't even require you to do even in like a double for loop, right? This specific question, you can just literally write a single for loop and be done with it. If you were comparing this to a standard computer science curriculum, this would be like a semester of a coding class or something like that. Let's go to question 2. And go to the next slide, Liz. Thank you. So question 2, you go one level higher. Again, can be done in any language. However, Q2 builds on the complexity, goes to the next level of the complexity. Here, again, the expected knowledge is string manipulation, built-in data types. You would typically be given a function. You don't need to parse standard in, standard out. So don't worry about trying to figure out how to do standard in, standard out parsing. It would be like, hey, given this function with these inputs, we want you to output something else. So the example here says, given a list of words, and it would be given to you as an array, which is a shared data type across all languages, and a complex word written in camel case. So it would be 2 inputs. Check if the complex word consists of words from the given list, right? So what you would need to return most likely would be true or false. The real question will give you a lot more details into what the inputs are, the format of it, what the expected output is. So it would be clearly defined. And you would have the opportunity to see some of the test cases as well. What Q2 doesn't include is it doesn't require you to know any fancy algorithms. So if you kind of from the first impression, you think, oh, I need to know some like dynamic programming or any fancy classic algorithms, that's not the case. It's really aimed to continue measuring your comfort level of translating some basic English into code. Let's go to Q3. This is where things start hitting up a little bit more. All right, so Q3 is aimed to measure your true implementation ability, right? Like push the limits of how well can you implement well-structured code? How well can you think through how to build up that code so you don't get into this spaghetti that you yourself can't find a way out of. As such, Q3 tends to be very implementation heavy. Sometimes we call this the question that's meant to truly measure your implementation skill, in the sense that, again, you don't need to come up with a fancy approach or like the most efficient way of doing this. In most cases, the question description itself would clearly spill out for you what you need to do. In many cases, the question description would even have an animation that just clearly shows you what is the algorithm supposed to be doing that you're in charge of writing. I've seen people say, hey, this animation sometimes get in the way. Remember that you can resize the panels. So the description part of it, when you're done reading it, feel free to just double click the separator and it will get out of your way. Now, the key of Q3 is you have to really carefully think through of your implementation, because if you don't, you have limited amount of time. You will run out of time without being able to fully debug and come up with a working solution. Because we carefully monitor, it's impossible to finish the implementation of Q3 in like 10, 15 lines of code. It is going to take you time to write out that code, but the better you plan for it, the more likely that you wouldn't get stuck in a code spaghetti that's hard to unwind and finish the implementation. But again, nothing that requires you to know advanced data structures or algorithms. All right, let's go to Q4. Liz, next slide. Yeah, there you go. Now, Q4 is where you get into performance and you get into efficiency. Obviously, not all jobs require you to write efficient code, but as a general coding assessment, we aim to measure both implementation as well as efficiency, right? And it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to do all 4 of these to pass the Upwork certification process, right? Just keep that in mind. This is not a test where it's meant to be you either get 100% or you fail. It's not that. This GCA is going to produce a range of scores, and the scores have clear areas that help Upwork see sort of what were you able to accomplish and where were you lacking. Now, Q4 aims to measure your ability to write code that's more performant. right? In many cases, you have companies that are really trying to run a platform on millions, if not tens of millions of devices and users. So writing code that's efficient, that doesn't time out, that doesn't use too many resources is key. So Q4, we often call it measures your problem solving skill. So for Q4, if you write a brute force solution, a brute force algorithm, it would most likely not pass the test cases. So it really tries to understand, can you come up with a more efficient way of doing it, aside from just translating the English into code. It still doesn't get too complicated, so it still doesn't include things like Dijkstra's, Kruskal, FFT algorithms. It only aims to measure core understanding of the most classic problem-solving techniques and to see if you have that knowledge or not. I think that wraps up Q4 as well. I'll hand it off to Bittu. Take it away.
Cool. Thank you, Tigran. Hi, all. We get started. My name is Bittu. I am Senior Director of Engineering here at Upwork. I've been here about 5+ years. I wanted to talk through the second piece of the assessment, which is what we call skill-specific test. So, what we did was we took essentially what CodeSignal helped build with GCA and aimed at building these skill-specific tests. So the tests are administered and certified by CodeSignal in a same manner that the first step is. So as far as the experience goes, exactly how you take the first step is how you take the second step. The specialized the skills tests are focused on like a role or a language, depending on what it is. So if you're on iOS, we have a Objective-C iOS and Swift iOS test, and there are JavaScript front end and back end tests. Can you go to next slide, Liz? So we followed all the great work Tigran and team has done with GCA over the years to not try to reinvent the wheel and try to build something very similar to GCA to produce these consistent results. And the framework that we sort of came up with it was that while GCA provided this ability to sort of test your overall knowledge on how you are doing it as engineer. On this one, we're going to specifically be focusing on one area. So let's say if you're a mobile iOS developer, we have about 3 questions that are very similar in a sense to probably like the question 3 and question 4 of GCA, but tailored toward iOS. And then in question 4 and 7, we also went rather than just asking just all coding questions, we also provided these multiple choice questions where where you don't have to code anything. It's necessarily just looking at a problem and looking at a bunch of options you've given. I think similar to GCA, I think it's not the same set of problem that everybody get, but the problems you will get are meant to test your skill in those regions so that it provides this consistent result. So if Tigran got a test on Android and I got one on Android, our question will be different, but they're going to be testing for same exact thing. The one last thing, obviously, is while in GCA you can pick your preferred language, and it is open to all the languages that CodeSignal support. In these skill-specific tests, they are limited to that language, right? If I am going to be testing you, asking you to show your skills in JavaScript, asking you to take the test in Java doesn't quite make sense. So tests are limited to this. Next slide, Liz, please. So to double click a little bit deeper on question sort of 1 to 3, the coding challenges, as I mentioned earlier, they're going to require, they're going to require a little bit more advanced algo techniques for you to know. Again, I don't think they're, specialized techniques you would need to know, like Tigran had mentioned earlier. But if it was to sort of provide it, somewhere between question 3 and question 4 of GCA is where these questions sits, and they are sort of be meant to check how well you understand data structure as sets and hash maps. The other big thing that also plays a factor here is how well you're doing with the solution when it comes to time complexity. So if solution works well, when your array has 10 items, but works really badly when you have 1,000 items in it, like the questions are meant to sort of showcase then and test for those to say, like, are you thinking about just the quickest path, or are you thinking about the the most optimal path that's going to allow you to scale? And reason for obviously is this, that for what the program is supposed to do is show your expertise and how well you know your domain area, how well you are in that specific area. And that's not just building something, but building something that can last and can scale. And the last thing is, it's the tests are sort of framework agnostic for the moment. So, for example, when you go to take JavaScript front-end test, it is purely JavaScript. We have, you won't take that and get a view question where you have been working React your whole life and etc. In the future, we may have React front-end test or a Angular front-end test, but for the moment being, the tests are framework agnostic. Obviously, there are some exceptions, like you can't take an iOS test without having the iOS framework knowledge in there, especially in some of the questions. But for all intents and purposes, the tests are decoupled from frameworks. Next question, or next slide, Liz. Now, the multiple choice questions. These are focused more on your breadth of a particular area. So, while the coding question can sort of go deeper in a specific area and allow us to sort of understand how well a hash map and when would you use a certain algorithm versus the other one. Sometimes you sort of you also have to figure out like how deep of a how deep you really understand your domain. And this is what multiple choice questions are supposed to sort of test. Now, they don't require any coding for you to provide answers. So, example could be is that, we may provide you a list of options and say like, hey, from these 10 things about NS object, what are, what is true and or what is false, pick those. And other examples could be something like, here's a simple code when this couple of loops would run through, what would it print to console on on the web. So these are sort of meant to sort of see how wide of understanding you have and how well you understand it. So this is one of the areas where we actually find very interesting revealing answers from folks. I think a lot of folks, because they're multiple choice, they tend to sort of go faster through them than the coding one and end up tripping up quite a bit. But these are, again, meant to test how well you know your knowledge about a certain area. And the last 4 questions in each of the tests are these multiple choice based options. I think now it's back to Tigran about what the experience looks like.
Yep. Okay. Hopefully you can hear me again.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, Bittu, for that overview. Super helpful. So I'm going to dive into the overall test experience, and it's going to be similar regardless of whether you're taking GCA or whether you're doing specialized assessments. So think of this as the kind of the core experience that you're going to have. So first of all, let's talk about the proctoring piece. Excuse me. So think of proctoring as a, sorry. Okay, so think of proctoring as just being in an interview with a human, right? So if you're in an interview with a human, treat it like that. Even though there's no human, it's auto-proctored and it can get reviewed by a human. But when I say think of it as doing it with a human is, for example, if you're doing an interview with a human, you would not like just take off and go do something else and come back, or you wouldn't just start talking to somebody else while you're completing an interview, right? So think of it as an automated interview. And during the proctored session, you're going to go through photo ID verification. Obviously, we want to make sure that you are who you say you are and you're taking the assessment by yourself and not somebody else doing it for you. Of course, you want to make sure you have stable internet connection, even though you wouldn't lose your work if your connection went out, but you would lose time. So the timer, if you accidentally drop off and then come back, your time could get reset and your certification could fail. Because again, if you dropped off, it could have been an accidental drop off, but then that can create a loophole where somebody intentionally dropped off, talked to somebody else, and then came back. So don't be surprised that even if accidentally you lose your internet connection, while we would love to give you the benefit of the doubt, because others would exploit it, you want to make sure that you have a stable internet connection. When doing it, time to focus and ideally uninterrupted. So again, think of it as an interview, right? If you were preparing to do an hour-long interview, you will tell everybody, maybe your roommate, maybe your family, that like, hey, I'm going to be doing this for 70 minutes. Please be quiet. Don't come and go, and just let me focus on getting this done. And obviously, we use the webcam and microphone to really fully automate the proctoring process and really ensure the integrity of the assessment. Because again, while most people wouldn't mess with the system, there are some that would. And in order for us to be able to give really everybody an opportunity to shine, we have to have strict measures to guarantee the integrity of the assessment. Let's go next, please. Okay, so let's talk about the next steps. So once you go next from proctoring setup, you're going to see a couple of roles. It will let you, in some cases, depending on what language options are available. In GCA, you would be able to pick any language you want, and others might be more restrictive, but it would give you an option to choose the language so you don't do it once the timer starts ticking. At this point, the timer is not ticking, so this is kind of the setup time. And when it comes to the rules around documentation, like, if you're doing something such as like, hey, I want to quickly see this name of this function, we wouldn't necessarily fail the certification because of that. But if you start Googling things such as, hey, how to solve this type of a question or something like that, that's obviously starting to diminish the value of the certification, because the goal is to see if you can do it on your own, not find someone on Stack Overflow that did it. While that's a skill in of itself, trying to find answers from someone else, that's not what's being tested. What's being tested is your ability to complete the assessment. Okay, let's go next. All right, and then once you jump into the test, this is kind of the view. It actually, a redesign of this was launched today, so it would look a little bit different, but still very similar. It would give you the list of questions that you can choose from, and you can go back and forth. So it's not meant to be a sequential. So it's not like you can't go to question 2 before you do the question 1. However, I have seen that people perform better if they go in order, especially for the first, second, and third questions, because the first 2 are really warm up and they're easier, significantly easier. So this is for GCA, but similar concepts apply to the specialized assessments. Regardless, you can go in order, you can flip back and forth. If you want, you can take a quick look in advance to what the questions are, if that helps you feel more comfortable in allocating your time. Also, when you're in a specific question, pay attention to the header where it shows the name of the question. It will have a drop-down letting you quickly flip back and forth between questions. So you don't actually have to come back to the test overview page and go back to the question. You can easily flip back and forth between questions as you go. And if you have written some code and you want to go to a different question, you wouldn't actually erase that code. So we save drafts every couple of seconds, just like when you're writing an email. So if you need to quickly flip back and forth, there is an indicator that says that your code is saved every couple of seconds. Same for if somehow by accident you close the tab or something like that. Even though, again, if this stops your webcam and the screen share process, this can result in a failed certification, but it wouldn't delete your code. It preserves the process, but it doesn't stop the timer. You can also skip questions, so you don't have to sort of finish it before you move on to something else. And running code doesn't really affect your score, so feel free to run, try it out. There will be, in most cases for coding questions, some visible tests, some hidden tests. So when you run the code, it shows you the result of the visible tests. The reason there are some hidden tests is otherwise you could do just if A, return the expected output for A, so you could easily just bypass the system. There is lots of checks and balances in place to make sure that we can detect when there's any sort of dishonest behavior going on, but some of it is visible, others are hidden in the background that you may or may not know about. And as I've already mentioned in the beginning, there's going to be 1 minute extra time on top of the whatever is allocated. And again, this is just meant to remind you to submit, because we've seen cases where people just got deep into the code and time run out, they're like, oh my God, I forgot to submit. But it's extra, but in that period, you won't be able to edit anything. And I think that sums it up. I'm sure you all have questions, so feel free to put it in the question area and we'll go through shortly and answer those.
Great, thank you, Tigran and Bittu. So I just want to do a quick reminder on the resources, and then we'll go ahead and start answering any of the questions that we might have. So in the chat, there is the link to Slido, so you can click on that link and submit a question. Again, if you have a question that's more of a one-on-one question that pertains to you specifically, you can email assessments@upwork.com and somebody on our team will help you out. And then there's also a link to the sign-up form. So if you want to start the process, but you don't have your invite or were invited previously and don't know where it's at, just fill out that sign-up form and we will prioritize you. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at, stop sharing my screen and look at questions. First question with 60 votes, will it affect my profile in any way if I fail the test? No, it will not. Nothing displays on your Upwork profile if you don't achieve a passing score for the test. So there's not any, the only risk you have is, you know, the time that you take to take the test. Great question. The next question is, what is the cost associated with this certification? There is no cost to you associated with the certification. Next question is, does the certification have an expiration date with 33 votes? So currently we don't have an expiration date on the certification. We do recognize though that there is, especially in the technical skills area, there is a definite value to something that is recent. Things are changing all the time. And so I do anticipate that might be something that could be looked at in the future as years go by.
Yeah, just to add to that, as Liz mentioned, yeah, currently we don't have an expression yet, but that is an active discussion. Maybe also I don't know if this is what the question meant, was when we invite you to take a certification, that does have an expiration of 2 weeks. So like if you do receive a CodeSignal link and to take the test, you have from the time you receive the link up to 2 weeks to take it. Otherwise, then the link expires.
The next question is, what resources are available for certification prep? Tigran, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I can take that one. I think when it comes to preparation, two types of preparations, right? Like one is getting comfortable with the platform. Two is just general learning. I mean, when it comes to general learning, the list of resources are countless because we've described the knowledge being measured from kind of core algorithms, data structures, all the way to language and domain specifics. So I won't list all educational tech resources here. When it comes to getting comfortable with the platform, before you start each test, there will be a sample test. And for GCA, there is also a practice GCA, okay? So in that flow, when you're setting up to begin the test, there is a section that says, try out a sample. And that sample will not be scored or visible to anybody on the Upwork side, but it would let you experiment with the IDE, try out things. You can even customize it to your needs, right? So if you prefer Vim key bindings versus Emacs or Sublime, you can actually configure that. You can change the theme, you can change tab sizes, and all of that will persist once you begin the real assessment. So you don't have to spend time doing those customizations during the main test. And as I said, for GCA, you will also have the opportunity to take a practice, and that practice assessment will mimic in many ways what you might expect from GCA in terms of question difficulty and progression.
Great, thanks, Tigran. The next question with 24 upvotes is, how many attempts do I have to pass the test? So from a perspective of taking the GCA or taking the skill specific test, when you take that test, you have one attempt to pass it, and then there's a 6-month waiting period where, as long as we still have the tests available, once you've taken that test attempt, we will allow you to retake it again after 6 months have passed. But as far as like the individual questions, I don't think there's any. I think you're allowed to continue to try to solve those questions within the time period within the individual tests themselves. Anything, Bittu or Tigran, that you want to add to that?
Nope, that covers it.
Okay.
Covers it.
Next question is, when we write a solution for a question, would it be possible for us to see if the solution is acceptable / correct with 30 upvotes?
Yes, depends. So multiple choice questions wouldn't tell you whether you answered it right or wrong. Coding questions, it would tell you if you did it right or wrong. And for visible tests, it would actually tell you what you did wrong. So if you're failing a visible test, it would tell you what was the input, what was the expected output, or what was the unit test that you couldn't pass. For hidden ones, it would just tell you that you're not passing it, but it wouldn't tell you why. So there is some feedback, but it's not doesn't apply to every single questions. We try to give as much feedback as possible without jeopardizing the integrity of the test and without leaving any loopholes there. So the aim has been to make the experience as comfortable as possible to the point where it will jeopardize the integrity of the test.
Great. Next question, another one for Tigran. Are we going to be allowed to research or Google for help to answer the questions?
So as I was describing it in the experience section, like depends on what you're Googling, right? Like obviously the safest way is not to Google anything, because you can accidentally, without meaning it, hits a some banned resource, right? So ideally, the system has really advanced auto-completion, right? Like it's VS Code style auto-completion. You have documentation right on the spot. So if you write something, doc, it will show you all the functions. You can click on the I to see documentation about it. So ideally, you're not Googling. If you really need to look up some sort of documentation, something that's like nothing to do with the question itself, it's more like some element of the syntax that you're forgetting, that should be okay. But then again, there's a blurry line between what is just a harmless kind of syntax lookup, what is a really materially helping you answer the specific question.
All right, next question. Do we get an in-browser IDE with sandbox and sample unit tests to validate our code before submitting?
Yes, that's exactly what the online IDE is. Some of the questions would be unit test based, others would be input-output test based. So depends on the question type, but that's exactly what it is. So it's not like write some code, blind, submit, and hope for the best. It's a real IDE that compiles and runs, outputs results, outputs stack traces and errors, highlights when you've got a dynamic compilation error. So we try to, as closely as possible, mimic your real working environment to make it a true flight simulator for you to demonstrate your skills. Of course, your true native environment is still very hard to mimic, especially if you've customized it or you're very comfortable with it. But we constantly push the limits of how far we can go in that area.
Great. The next question is, will there be a possibility of getting multiple certifications, and will there be any benefit to getting multiple certifications? I can answer this one. So currently we are prioritizing inviting people who don't have a certification yet, just so that we can offer it to the broadest amount of talent on Upwork. I do think in the future, it's probably likely that we will offer the ability to take more than one certification if you have more than one skill. As far as having a benefit to getting multiple certifications, obviously the more information that you're able to display on your Upwork profile about your capabilities, the easier it is for others to know if you're a match for projects that they're hiring for. So I think there is a benefit to being able to get multiple certifications if that is, what best reflects your skills and capabilities. The next question with 19 upvotes is, if I missed the test for any reason, can I try again later? I think you're referring to that 2-week time period, and the answer is yes, you sure can. We have follow-up emails that we send out allowing you to sign up for when you would like to take that test. We can't always guarantee the future availability of tests and how long that we'll be testing in this manner. So when you get the invite, you know it's available then. So if you take it then that's a good bet. If you sign up to take it, a week from now, it's probably going to be available 6 months from now. There's just no way for us to accurately predict the future. But as long as it's available for the time that you sign up to take it, and nothing has changed with your eligibility, your account's still in good standing and whatnot, then we'll allow you to take the test at that time. The next question is, can we get a copy of the slides with 21 upvotes? We will be sharing a copy of the link to the recording within the help article for Upwork Skill Certifications. I don't know, Jed or Suleiman, if you happen to have it handy, if you could link or Google and see if you can find and link the Earn an Upwork Skill Certification help article in the chat. But we will be adding the link to that. And I'm not sure on the slides. I will check on if we can also make the slides available. And if we can, we will do that. The next question is, are all the results Upwork exclusive? After doing the test, can we use the results to present personal badges on personal sites with 22 upvotes.
Let me start. You can follow up on this list. So GCA is not Upwork exclusive. So there's lots of companies that actually use GCA as a top of the funnel qualification. So don't be surprised if kind of a couple of weeks after this, somebody asks you if you apply to a company for a full-time job or even a part-time, they ask you to do GCA, and you can share the same result. So you can actually take that and say, okay, allow to see my result that I have from a week or two ago, or you can take it again. Now, when it comes to the specialized knowledge, that is very Upwork proprietary. So I'll let you guys kind of answer whether you're okay with them sharing it with anyone else or not.
I think so. I think sharing the badge publicly, it's, we're okay with. I think what we have not set open for public is actually sharing your full test and to say this is what I did. Go look at my my results for a specific question, thing of that nature. So for the moment, that is Upwork specific only, but the certification badge itself is publicly shareable, and folks are doing that on other networking sites or their personal sites.
The next question is, how many points do I need to achieve to get the certification? At this time, we don't publicize the points that you need to earn for the certification, and I don't believe the actual points display when you're taking the test in the way that we utilize those points. Is there a way to get is that correct, Tigran? Is there any sort of point type scale when they're solving a question? Do they know if they got the question right and have some idea of weight, or?
There is, but you don't get full feedback. Like the level of insight that Upwork gets to see is not visible on the consumer side, but you do get enough feedback to know, like, if you're doing the question right, or like basically there's enough of a feedback loop to enable you to finish it. But Upwork gets a more deeper analysis of the results. And as you said, it's not shared right now. What is it that kind of qualifies or disqualifies? It's not a sort of the threshold, or even if there is a threshold or not, isn't publicized.
And something that we could probably think about doing, I don't know if as developers, if you would find this helpful, but we could maybe consider being able to provide some feedback on like a percentage area of where you scored comparatively. So if you think something like that would be helpful, or if you go through the experience and you have feedback on how we can make this more valuable to you, please share that with my team or using that email address, because we really want to make this a helpful program and tool for you and your profession. Another question with 31 upvotes, can I code in my IDE in my local environment?
You should, and there is a similar question here that I want to answer both together. When it comes to what you can and cannot do, it might vary depending on which assessment you're taking. So please make sure to read the rules, right? So like before you start, there's a clear set of rules and guidelines. I'm very sure that coding in your own IDE in your local environment will be one of the rules that says don't do it. And one of the reasons behind it is the way we come up with the score isn't just the final code. It also analyzes some of the in progress, like what happens as you go through it. So the process itself is also important, not just kind of where you've gotten in the end. Hence, it's one of the requirements to actually keep coding in the online IDE instead of your local environment.
Great, thanks, Tigran. And the next one is, how is the test being evaluated? Is that by machine or human?
Yeah, so it's fully automated. There are no humans assigning you a score or evaluating it in the end. That's not true for the proctored session. So the proctored session is a human-machine process that automates, but also adds a human Q&A to make sure that, for example, if you ever fail a certification because there was, with some generic, like there was something suspicious, don't think that it was a machine judgment only, right? So like we would never fail a certification claiming that you did something wrong and just have it be a decision made by a machine. We always have a human double check that. That's not the only time humans get involved in the checking process, but we do want to make sure that if you do get disqualified because of some suspicious behavior, that was reviewed by a human and that was a fair assessment instead of just a mistake because the machine learning algorithm thought that like the bird that flew by was a friend helping you. So.
All right, next question with 24 upvotes. I understand not using sources like Stack Overflow, but what about official language documentation?
Yep, so same thing. This is the one that I was referring to, right? Like read the instructions of the rules, because again, this is different. For GCA, using official documentation, it's part of the rules that says it's okay to use official language documentation. But for specialized knowledge, for example, a lot of the language-specific assessments would include multiple choice questions that really tries to test your understanding and the familiarity with the language. So if you go start looking it up in the documentation, that would be a violation of the rules. So do check the rules before you start the assessment.
And those display, Tigran, correct me if I'm wrong, but those display as actual screens as you're going through the experience of taking the assessment. So it's not like you have to go check a document and make sure you read some, PDF file ahead of time. Just pay attention to the screen, make sure you read everything on there before you click the next button or click I agree, and you'll be good.
Yeah. Exactly. It's one of the initial screens that says, here are the rules, and it clearly documents what is okay, what's not.
Awesome, thank you. The next question with 19 upvotes is, why don't we have frameworks in the certification section? Bittu, maybe you can speak to this one.
Yeah, I mean, we're always evaluating what we need to test. I think where we have started is a starting point for us, and there's a more than a good chance that some frameworks will end up landing. I think which one and when are still being figured out, but for the moment, we don't have an official date for when frameworks would come out, if they will.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have about 2 minutes, so time for a few more questions. The next one is, I already have a Microsoft certificate on C#. Do I need to take an assessment test given that you will provide a C# test? So today, go ahead, Bittu.
Sorry, yeah. So if you do have external certificates like from Microsoft or Oracle or other places like that, Upwork does provide a way for you to add those certificates to your profile, and they are validated, by doing a call to them and then making sure it's valid, and how long we keep them on the profile. Again, as we mentioned, all of these are signals to provide, how well you are in your domain area, to the client that you're applying the job for. So, getting a C# certificate from Microsoft is obviously good enough. If you think that's good enough for you and you don't want to do the Upwork Skill Certification on that, then I think that's fair enough. You could leverage that to maybe do a separate skill set that you may have, Java backend or something along that nature.
Thank you. So we are out of time. I would encourage you, there are some questions that didn't get addressed. If you will email them to assessments@upwork.com, we will get those questions answered for you. We will reach out to Tigran if we need help from his team to answer those questions. I appreciate everybody's time in joining the call and learning about Upwork Skill Certifications. And thanks, Tigran and Bittu, for helping to present this. I hope you found this a valuable use of your time, and hope to see you go through the process to come earn an Upwork Skill Certification.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time.
Bye.
Bye.